Hello and Assalamu alaikum. I am today live here. This is my first live, and I am facing a lot of problems in setting this camera because I am quite inexperienced in this field. Today, I have come here with a story from the book Roads of Destiny from O. Henry, who has always been a good writer of short stories. I would like to read these pages for you to enjoy the whole story. I go to seek on many roads what is to be. True heart and strong with love to light, will they not bear me in the fight? To order, shun, or wield, or mold my destiny? This is from his unpublished poems of David Magnell. Let's begin the story. This is a very important short story. The song was over. The words were David's. The air, one of the countryside. The company about the end table applauded heartily, for the young poet paid for the wine, only the notary. Mr. Papione shook his head a little at the lines, for he was a man of books and he had not drunk with the rest. David went out into the village street where the night air drove the wine vapor from his head. And then he remembered that he and Yvonne had quarreled that day, and that he had resolved to leave his home that night to seek fame and honor in the great world outside. When my poems are on every man's tongue, he told himself in a fine exhilaration, she will perhaps think of the hard words she spoke this day. Except the roisterers in the tavern, the village folks were ebbed. David crept softly into his room in the shed of his father's cottage and made a bundle of his small store of clothing. With his upon a staff, he set his face outward upon the road that ran from Verneuil. He passed his father's herd of sheep, huddled in their nighty pen. The sheep he herded daily, leaving them to scatter while he wrote verses on scraps of papers. He saw a light yet shining in Yvonne's window, and a weakness shook his purpose of a sudden. Perhaps that light meant that she rued, sleepless, her anger, and that morning might. But no, his decision was made. Verneuil was no place for him. Not one soul there could share his thoughts. Out along that road lay his fate and his future. 3 leagues across the dim, moonlit Champagne ran the road straight as a ploughman's furrow. It was believed in the village that the road ran to Paris at least, and this name the poet whispered often to himself as he walked. Never so far from Verneuil had David travelled before. 3 leagues, then the road ran and turned into a puzzle. It joined with another and a larger road at right angles. David stood uncertain for a while and then took the road to the left. Upon this more important highway were imprinted in the dust wheel tracks left by the recent passage of some vehicle. Some half an hour later, these traces were verified by the sight of a ponderous carriage mired in a little brook at the bottom of a steep hill. The driver and the postilions were shouting and tugging at the horses' bridles. On the road at one side stood a huge black clothed man and a slender lady, wrapped in a huge light cloak. David saw the lack of skill in the efforts of the servants. He quietly assumed control of the work. He directed the outriders to cease their clamor at the horses and to exercise their strength upon the wheels. The driver alone urged the animals with a familiar voice. David himself heaved a powerful shoulder at the rear of the carriage, and with one harmonious tug, the great vehicle rolled up on slight ground. The outriders climbed to their places. David stood for a moment upon the foot. David stood for a moment upon the foot. The huge gentleman waved a hand. You will enter the carriage, he said in a voice large like himself, but soothed, but smoothed by art, and said, obedience belonged in the path of such a voice. Brief as was the young poet's hesitation, it was cut shorter still by a renewal of the command. David's foot went to the step. In the darkness, he perceived dimly the form of the lady upon the rear seat. He was about to seat himself opposite when the voice again swayed him to its will. You will sit at the lady's side? The gentleman swung his great weight to the forward seat. The carriage proceeded up the hill. The lady was shrunk silent into her corner. David could not estimate whether she was old or young, but a delicate, mild perfume from her clothes stirred his poet's fancy to the belief that there was loveliness beneath the mystery. Here was an adventure such as he had often imagined, but as yet he held no key to it, for no word was spoken while he sat with his impenetrable companions. In an hour's time, David perceived through the window that the vehicle traversed the street of some town. Then it stopped in front of a closed and darkened house, and a postilio alighted to hammer impatiently upon the door. A latticed window above flew wide and a night-capped head popped out. Who are ye that disturb honest folk at this time of night? My house is closed. 'Tis too late for profitable travellers to be abroad. Cease knocking at my door and be off. Open, spluttered the physicians loudly. Open for Monsieur the Marquis de Beaupertuis. Ah, cried the voice above, 10,000 pardons, my lord. I did not know the hour is so late. At once shall the door be opened, and the house placed at my lord's disposal. Inside was heard the clink of chain and bar, and the door was flung open. Shivering with chill and apprehensions, the landlord of the Silver Flagon stood half clad, candle in hand, upon the threshold. David followed the Marquis out of the carriage. Assist the lady, he was ordered. The poet obeyed. He felt her small hand tremble as he guided her descent. Into the house was the next command. The room was the long dining hall of the tavern. A great oak table ran down its length. The huge gentleman seated himself in a chair at the near end. The lady sank into another against the wall with an air of great weariness. David stood, considering how best he might now take his leave and continue upon his way. My lord, said the landlord, bowing to the floor, had I expected this honor, entertainment would have been ready. There is wine and cold fowl and maybe candles, said the Marquis, spreading the fingers one plump white hand in a gesture he had. Yes, my lord. He fetched half a dozen candles, lighted them, and set them upon the table. If Monsieur would perhaps dine to taste a certain Burgundy, there is a cask. Candles, said Monsieur, spreading his fingers. Assuredly, quickly, I fly, my lord. A dozen more lighted candles shone in the hall. The great bulk of the Marquis overflowed his chair. He was dressed in fine black form, head to foot, save for the snowy ruffles at his wrist and throat. Even the hilt and scabbard of his sword were black. My house is closed. It is too late for profitable travelers to be abroad. Cease knocking my door and be off. Open, spluttered the postilion loudly. Open for Monsieur, the Marquis de Beaupertuis. Ah, cried the voice above, 10,000 pardons, my lord. I didn't know the hour is so late. At once shall the door be opened, and the house placed at my lord's disposal. Inside was heard the clink of chain and bar, and the door was flung open. Shivering with chill and apprehension, the landlord of the Silver Flagon stood, half clad, candle in hand, upon the threshold. David followed the Marquis out of the carriage. Assist the lady. He was ordered. The poet obeyed. He felt her small hand trembling as he guided her descent. Into the house. This was the next command. The room was a long dining hall of the tavern. A great oak table ran down its length. The huge gentleman seated himself in a chair at the nearer end. The lady sank into another against the wall. With an air of great weariness, David stood, considering how best he might now take his leave and continue upon his way. My lord, said the landlord, bowing to the floor, had I expected this honor entertainment, would have been ready. Um, there is wine and cold fowl and maybe candles, said the Marquis, spreading the fingers of one plump white hand in a gesture he had. Yes, my lord. He fetched half a dozen candles, lighted them, and set them upon the table. If Monsieur would perhaps deign to taste a certain Burgundy, there is a cask. Candles, said Monsieur, spreading his fingers. Assuredly, quickly, I fly, my lord. A dozen more lighted candles shone in the hall. The great bulk of the Marquis overflowed his chair. He was dressed in fine black from head to foot, save for the snowy ruffles at his wrist and throat. Even the hilt and scabbard of his sword were black. His expression was one of the sneering pride. The ends of an upturned moustache reached nearly to his mocking eyes. The lady sat motionless, and now David perceived that she was young and possessed of pathetic and appealing beauty. He was startled from the contemplation of her forlorn loveliness by the blooming voice of the Marquis. What is your name and pursuit? David Mignot. I am a poet. The mustache of the Marquis curled nearer to his eyes. How do you live? I am also a shepherd. I guarded my father's flock. David answered, with his head high but a flush upon his cheek. I am also a shepherd. I guarded my father's flock, David answered, with his head high but a flush upon his cheek. Then listen, master shepherd and the poet, to the fortune you have blundered upon tonight. This lady is my niece, Mademoiselle Lucie de Varennes. She is of noble descent and is possessed of 10,000 francs a year in her own right. She is of noble descent and is possessed of 10,000 francs a year in her own right. As to her charms, you have but to observe for yourself. If the inventory pleases your shepherd's heart, she becomes your wife at a word. Do not interrupt me. Tonight I conveyed her to the chateau of the Comte de Villemur, to whom her hand had been promised. Guests were present. The priest was waiting. Her marriage to one eligible in rank and fortune was ready to be accomplished. At the altar, this demoiselle, so meek and dutiful, she turned upon me like a leopardess, charged me with cruelty and crimes, and broke before the gaping priest the troth I had plighted for her. I swore there and then by 10,000 devils that she should marry the first man we met after leaving the chateau, be he prince, charcoal burner, or thief, or anyone else. You, shepherd, are the first. Mademoiselle must be wed this night. If not you, then another. You have 10 minutes in which to make your decision. Do not vex me with words or questions. 10 minutes, shepherd, and they are speeding. The Marquis drummed loudly with his white fingers upon the table. He sank into a veiled attitude of waiting. It was as if some great house had shut its doors and windows against approach. David would have spoken, but the huge man's will cherish you with all my heart and make your life less sad. Will you trust your fate to me, mademoiselle? Ah, you would sacrifice yourself from pity? From love, the time is almost up, mademoiselle. You will regret it and then despise me. I will live only to make you happy and myself worthy of you. Her fine small hand crept into his from beneath her cloak. I will trust you. I will trust you, she breathed with my life. And once away from the power of his eyes, I may forget. David went and stood before the Marquess. The black figure stirred, and the mocking eyes glanced at the great hall clock. 2 minutes to spare. A shepherd requires 8 minutes to decide whether he will accept a bride of beauty and income. Speak up, shepherd. Do you consent to become Mademoiselle's husband? Mademoiselle said, David, standing proudly, has done me the honor to yield to my request that she become my wife. Well said the Marquis. You have yet the making of a courtier in you, Master Shepherd. Mademoiselle could have drawn a worse prize after all. And now to be done with the affair as quick as the church and the devil will allow. He struck the table soundly with his sword hilt. The landlord came, knee shaking, bringing more candles in the hope of anticipating the great lord's whims. Fetch a priest, said the Marquis. A priest. Do you understand? In 10 minutes, have a priest here. The landlord dropped his candles and flew. The priest came, heavy eyed and ruffled. He made David Mignet and Lucy de Vermes man and wife. Pocketed a gold piece that the Marquis tossed him and shuffled out again into the night. Wine, ordered the Marquis, spreading his ominous fingers at the host. Fill glasses, he said when it was brought. He stood up at the head of the table, in the candlelight, a black mountain of venom and conceit. With something like the memory of an old love turned to poison in his eye as it fell upon his knees. Monsieur Mignet, you have taken to be your wife one after I say this to you. You have taken to be your wife one who will make your life a foul and wretched thing. The blood in her is an inheritance running black lies and red ruin. She will bring you shame and anxiety. The devil that descended to her is there in her eyes and skin and mouth that stoop even to beguile a peasant. There is your promise, Monsieur Poet, for a happy life. Drink your wine at last, mademoiselle. I am rid of you. The Marquis drank a little grievous cry, as if from a sudden wound, came from the girl's lips. David, with his glass in his hand, stepped forward 3 paces and faced the Marquis. There was little of a shepherd in his bearing. Just now, he said calmly, you did me the honor to call me monsieur. May I hope, therefore, that my marriage to mademoiselle has placed me somewhat nearer to you in, let us say, reflected rank, has given me the right to stand more as an equal to Monsieur in a certain little piece of business I have in my mind? You may hope, Shepherd, sneering the Marquis. Then said David, dashing his glass of wine into the contemptuous eyes that mocked him. Perhaps you will con- condescend to fight me. The fury of the great lord outbroke in one sudden curse like a blast from a horn. He tore his sword from its black sheath. He called to the hovering landlord, a sword there for his loot. He turned to the lady with a laugh that chilled her heart and said, You put much labor upon me, madame. It seems I must find you a husband and make you a widow in the same night. I know not swordplay, said David. He flushed to make the confession before his lady. I know not swordplay, mimicked the Marquis. Shall we fight like peasants? With oaken cudgels? Hola, Francois my pistols. Our postilion brought two shining great pistols ornamented with carven silver from the carriage holsters. The Marquis tossed one upon the table near David's hands. To the other end of the table, he cried, Even a shepherd may pull a trigger. Few of them attain the honor to die by the weapon of a Beaupertize. The shepherd and the Marquis faced each other from the ends of the long table. The landlord, in an ague of terror, clutched the air and stammered, Monsieur, for the love of Christ, not in my house. Do not spill blood. It will ruin my custom. The look of the Marquis threatening him paralyzed his tongue. Coward, coward, cried the Lord. Cease chattering your teeth long enough to give the word for us. If you can. Mine host knees smote the floor. He was without a vocabulary. Even sounds were obeyed. Even the sounds were beyond him. Still by gesture he seemed to beseech peace in the name of his house and custom. I will give the word, said the lady in a clear voice. She went up to David and kissed him sweetly. Her eyes were sparkling bright and color had come to her cheeks. She stood against the wall, and the two men levelled their pistols for her count. The two reports came so nearly together that the candles flickered but once. The Marquis stood, smiling, the fingers of the left hand resting outspread upon the end of the table. David remained erect and turned his head very slowly, searching for his wife with his eyes. Then, as the gentleman falls from where it is hung, he sank, crumpled upon the floor. With a little cry of terror and despair, the widowed maid ran and stooped over him. She found his wound and then looked up with her old look of pale melancholy. Through his heart, she whispered, oh, his heart. Come, boomed the great voice of the Marquis. Out with Out with you to the carriage. Daybreak shall not find you on my hands. Wed you shall be again, and to a living husband this night. The next we come upon my lady highwayman or peasant. If the road yields no other than the churl that opens my gates, out with you to the carriage. The Marquis, implacable and huge, the lady wrapped again in the mystery of her cloak, the postillion bearing the weapons, all moved out to the waiting carriage. The sound of its ponderous wheels rolling away echoed through the slumbering village. In the hall of the Silver Flagon, the distracted landlord wrung his hands above the slain poet's body, while the flames of the 24 candles danced and flickered on the table. Now let's move toward the second part of the story. 3 leagues then the road ran and turned into a puzzle. It joined with another and a larger road at right angles. David stood uncertain for a while and then took the road to the right. Whither it led he knew not, but he was resolved to leave Verneuil far beyond that night. He travelled a league and then passed a large chateau which showed testimony of recent entertainment. Lights shone from every window. From the great stone gateway ran a tracery of wheel tracks drawn in the dust by the vehicles of the guests. 3 leagues farther, and David was weary. He rested and slept for a while on a bed of pine boughs at the roadside. Then up and on again along the unknown way. Thus for 5 days he travelled the great road, sleeping upon nature's blasphemic beds or in peasants' tricks, eating of their black hospitable bread, drinking from streams of the willing cup of the Gothard. At length he crossed a great bridge and set foot within the smiling city that has crushed or crowned more poets than all the rest of the world. His breath came quickly as Paris sang to him in a little undertone her vital chant of greeting, the hum of voice and foot and wheel. High up under the eaves of an old house in the Rue Conti. David paid for lodging and set himself in a wooden chair to his poems. The strait, once sheltered citizens of important consequences, was now given over to those who ever follow in the wake of decline. The houses were tall and still possessed of ruined dignity, but many of them were empty save for dust and the spider. By night, there was the clash of the steel and the cries of brawlers straying restlessly from inn to inn, where once gentility aboard was now but a rancid and rude incontinence. But here David found housing commensurate to his scant purse. Daylight and candlelight found him at pen and paper. One afternoon he was returning from a foraging trip to the lower world with bread and curds and a bottle of thin wine. He halfway up his dark stairway he met, or rather came upon, for she rested on the stair, a young woman of a beauty that should balk even the justice of a poet's imagination. A loose dark cloak flung open showed a rich gown beneath. Her eyes changed swiftly with every little shade of thought. Within one moment, they would be round and artless like a child's, and long and cozening like a gypsy's. One hand raised her gown, underwrapping a little shoe, high heeled with its ribbons dangling untied. So heavenly she was, so unfitted to stoop, so qualified to charm and command. Perhaps she had been David coming and had waited for his help. Ah, would Monsieur pardon that she occupied the stairway? But the shoe, the naughty shoe, alas, it would not remain tied. Ah, if Monsieur would be so gracious. The poet's fingers trembled as he tied the contrary ribbons. Then he would have fled from the danger of her presence, but the eyes grew long and cozening like a gypsy's and held him. He leaned against the balustrade, clutching his bottle of sour wine. You have been so good, she said, smiling. Does Monsieur perhaps live in the house? Yes, madame. I think so, madame. Perhaps in the third story then. No, madame, higher up. The lady fluttered her fingers with the last possible gesture of impatience. Pardon. Certainly, I am not discreet in asking. Monsieur will forgive me. It is surely not becoming that I should inquire where he lodges. Madam, do not say so. I live in the. No, 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 do not tell me. Now I see that I erred, but I cannot lose the interest I feel in this house and all that is in it. Once it was my home, often I come here but to dream of those happy days again. Will you let that be my excuse? Let me tell you then, for you need not excuse, stammered the poet. I live in the top floor, the small room where the stairs turn. In the front room? Asked the lady, turning her head sideways. The rear, madam. The lady sighed as if with relief. I will detain you no longer than Monsieur, she said, employing the round and artless eye. Take good care of my house. Alas, only the memories of it are mine now. Adieu, and accept my thanks for your courtesy. She was gone, leaving but a smile and a trace of sweet perfume. David climbed the stairs as one in slumber, but he awoke from it, and the smile and the perfume lingered with him, and never afterward did either seem quite to leave him. This lady of whom he knew nothing drove him to lyrics of his eyes. Chansons of swiftly conceived love, odes to curling hair, and sonnets to slippers on slender feet. Poet he must have been, for Yvonne was forgotten. This fine new loveliness held him with its freshness and grace. The subtle perfume about her filled him with strange emotions. On a certain night, three persons were gathered about a table in a room on the third floor of the same house. Three chairs on the table and a lighted candle upon it was all the furniture. One of the persons was a huge man dressed in black. His expression was one of the sneering pride. The ends of his upturned mustache reached nearly to his mocking eyes. Another was a lady, young and beautiful, with eyes that could be round and artless like a child's, and long and cozening like a gypsy's, but were now keen and ambitious, like any other conspirators. The third was a man of action, a combatant, a bold and impatient executive, breathing fire and steel. He was addressed by the others as Captain Desrolas. This man struck the table with his fist and said with controlled violence, Tonight, tonight, as he goes to midnight mass, I am tired of the plotting that gets nowhere. I am sick of signals and ciphers and secret meetings and such baragouin. Let us be honest traitors. If France is to be rid of him, let us kill in the open and not hunt with snares and traps. Tonight, I say, I back my words, my hand will do the deed. Tonight, as he goes to Mass. The lady turned upon him a cordial look. Women, however wedded to plots, must ever thus bow to rash courage. The big man stroked his upturned mustache. Dear Captain, he said in a great voice softened by habit, this time I agree with you. Nothing is to be gained by waiting. Enough of the palace guards belong to us to make the endeavor a safe one. Tonight, repeated the captain Desrolas, again striking the table. You have heard me, Marquis. My hand will do the deed. But now, said the huge man softly, comes a question. Word must be sent to our partisans in the palace and a signal agreed upon. Our stanchest men must accompany the royal carriage. At this hour, what messengers can penetrate so far as the south doorway? Ribeaud is stationed there. Once a message is placed in his hands, all will go well. I will send the message, said the lady. Life, no one without it can gain entrance to the palace ground after nightfall. If you will, Monsieur, take him this letter so that my mother may see him before she closes her eyes. Give it to me, said David eagerly, but shall I let you return home through the streets alone so late? I no, no, fly. Each moment is like a precious jewel. Sometimes, said the lady, with eyes long and cozening like a gypsy's, I will try to thank you for your goodness. The poet thrust the letter into his breast and bounded down the stairway. The lady, when he was gone, returned to the room below. The eloquent eyebrow of the Marquis interrogated her. He is gone, she said, as fleet and stupid as one of his own sheep to deliver it. The table shook again from the better of the captain Deslo's fist. Sacred name, he cried, I have left my pistols behind. I can trust no other. Take this, said the Marquis, drawing from the beneath his cloak a shining great weapon ornamented with carven silver. There are none truer, but guard it closely, for it bears my arms and crest, and already I am suspected. Me, I must put my many leagues between myself and Paris this night. Tomorrow must find me in my chateau after you, dear Countess. The Marquis puffed out the candle. The lady, well clothed, and the two gentlemen softly descended the stairway and flowed into the crowd that roamed along narrow pavements of the Rue Conti. David sped at the south gate of the king's residence at a halberd was laid to the breast, and he turned its point with the words, "The falcon has left his nest." "Pass, brother," said the guard, "and go quickly." On the south step of the palace they moved to seize him, but again the watchers, one among them stepped forward and began, "Let him go." But a flurry among the guard told of surprise. A man of keen look and considerably stride suddenly pressed through them and seized the letter which David held in his hand. "Come with me," he said, and led him inside the great hall. Then he tore open the letter and read it. He beckoned to a man uniformed as an officer of musketeer who was passing. "Captain Tattrew, you will have the guards at the south entrance and the south gate arrested and confined. Place men known to the royal in their places." To David he said, "Come with me." He conducted him through a corridor and an anteroom into a spacious chamber, where a melancholy man, somberly dressed, sat brooding in a great leather covered chair. To that man he said, "Sire, I have told you that the palace is full of traitors and spies as the sphere is of the rats. You have thought, sire, that it was my fancy. This man penetrated into your very door by their connivance. He bore a letter which I have intercepted. I have brought him here, and that your majesty may no longer think my zeal excessive. I will question him. From where do you come? Asked the king. From the village of Vanoy, in the province of Urate, Loire, sire. What do you follow in Paris? I would do. I would be a poet, sire. What did you do in Vanoy? I minded my father's flock of sheep. The king stirred again, and the film lifted from his eyes. "Ah, in the fields. Yes, sire. You lived in the fields. You went out in the cool of the morning and lay among the hedges and the grass. The flock distributed itself upon the hillside. You drank the living stream. You ate your sweet brown bread in the shade. You listened, doubtless, to blackbirds piping in the grove. Not that so, shepherd?" "It is, sire," answered David with a sigh. "And to the bees, to the flower, and maybe to the grape gathered singing on the hills." "Yes, yes," said the king impatiently, "maybe to them, but surely to the blackbirds they whistled often in the grove, did they not?" "Nowhere, sire, so swiftly as in Urate Loire. I have endeavored to express this song in some verses that I have written." "Can you repeat those verses?" asked the king eagerly. "A long time ago I listened to the blackbirds. It would be something better than a kingdom if one could rightly construe their songs. And at night you drove the sheep to the fold and then sat in peace and tranquility to your pleasant bread. Can you repeat those verses, shepherd?"